One of the entrepreneurs who had the biggest impact on me was Steve Jobs, and I want to share with you 5 lessons that I think are relevant to entrepreneurs today. Here are 5 lessons from Steve Jobs. So the first one is the power of the pitch. One of my favorite pitches that Steve Jobs ever did was when he was 24 years old. He's standing on a stage in front of a group of people who are there to learn a bit more about Apple, and he starts sharing about how he's going to take on IBM. And when he starts talking, you think, this is ridiculous. How is this young kid going to take on one of the biggest companies in the world? But by the end of his pitch, you want to join him, you want to join the team, you want to be part of it. It feels believable, it feels exciting. And that was just one of the first times that I saw Steve Jobs pitch something into existence. Now, obviously his whole career was defined by his pitching skills. When he took the stage, whether it was launching the iPhone or launching the iPod or launching the MacBook Air, he was revealing something that you didn't even know that you wanted. And then the way that he was explaining it, the way that he was enrolling you, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, you felt like you couldn't live without it. They called this the reality distortion field. This was Steve Jobs' superpower, his ability to enroll people in the future and enroll people in big ideas. The second lesson I got from Steve Jobs is a strength in philosophy. Steve Jobs was a philosopher. He would always talk about how the world is just made up by people no smarter than you. He would talk about an entrepreneur's job is to make a dent in the universe, or else why even bother? That's where we get the word dent from in my company. He would talk about how computers are a bicycle for the mind. He was excellent at analogies. He was excellent at underlying philosophies. When towards the end of his life, he was passing the company on to Tim Cook, he gave a speech where he said the underlying philosophy of Apple is about liberal arts at the intersection of technology. He said technology is not enough and liberal arts is not enough. Apple has to have both, and he shared that philosophy. One of the most powerful pieces of content that he ever published was the Think Different advertising campaign. At the time that he launched this, the business was almost out of business. They were 90 days away from bankruptcy. He had to redefine what the business was going to be about. And he had to redefine the brand, and he launched the Think Different campaign. It was truly iconic, and it got people to buy into the underlying philosophy, not just the surface level products. The third thing I learned from Steve Jobs was the idea of having great products, and great products that would stand the test of time. Steve Jobs truly believed that a product is an art form, and he was passionate about making sure that the product lived up to customer expectations and that it was exceptional. He never wanted to describe that it was a quality product. He wanted that to be self-evident, and in particular, he loved the idea of a product ecosystem, which is something that has made Apple so strong as a business today. So he understood that the iPod wasn't just a standalone product, it was a gateway product to owning a Mac. And that if you had a great experience with the iPod, which they thought of as a product for prospects, then there was a good chance that you would go across and buy the Mac. Now, when Apple was 90 days away from bankruptcy, they were doing something like 3,000 products badly, but he came in and he put a big cross through all of it. He said, we're gonna do laptops, professional and consumer. We're gonna do desktops, professional, consumer. That is gonna be our core product. We're gonna have an iPod as our product for prospects, and we're gonna have iTunes as something free that anyone can get. And he built this product and ecosystem for Apple. And as a result of getting that product ecosystem right, it just turbocharged the growth of Apple at that time. And he made those key product decisions that no one else could make. And that was the thing that turned Apple around. The fourth thing I learned from Steve Jobs was the use of his personal brand, his profile, the way that he brought Apple to life through his stage presence. He was exceptionally good at speaking on stage. He was also very, very selective about how he would use his image and how he would be on certain publications and certain media appearances. And he would craft his stories and craft his narrative to make sure that his personal brand was actually reflecting certain values onto the company brand. For me, it was the first time that I saw the power of a key person of influence at a really, really high level. What was interesting is that he used his personal brand to take on IBM. IBM was a much bigger company, but they were a faceless company, and Steve Jobs was the first young entrepreneur to say, hey, you know what? I'm the face of the business. I'm going to get out there and represent this business. And as a result, he was able to take on IBM and win. So that personal brand, that profile, that use of bringing a business to life through the face. And it's actually interesting, to this day, Tim Cook, who's an introvert who wouldn't naturally want to be on stage, has been able to adopt that strategy and carry the mantle of being the personal brand and the face of Apple as well. The fifth thing I want to say about Steve Jobs is that a lot of people knew that the young Steve Jobs was very prickly, he was very isolationist, he was a difficult character to work with, and there's a lot of publicity about that. But later in his life, he changed, and there's a book called Becoming Steve Jobs, which explains that change. It wasn't really covered in the Walter Isaacson's version, but In Becoming Steve Jobs, it shows this evolution of someone who learned how to partner with others. Most famously, he partnered with the music industry to create digital music, but he also was able to create a feeling of partnership with the people in the team and also the customers. When you were buying from Apple in those early days with Steve Jobs, you felt like you were part of something. You weren't just buying a product, you were actually feeling like you were a partner in co-creating the future as part of this vision that Steve Jobs had. So he was very, very good at bringing together partnerships. He became exceptionally good at working with the team at Pixar and not overstepping his boundaries. He learned his lessons from being someone who got kicked out of his own company to someone who was an enduring leader who had plenty of people who worked with him for decades, and he figured out how to build that spirit of partnership where the rapport was so strong that they could still have prickly conversations, they could still have radical candor, but they could do that within the spirit of partnership. And as a result, he was able to create some phenomenal game-changing results through partnerships. So there you have it. 5 things that I learned from Steve Jobs, 5 things that you can take away. And obviously Steve Jobs' story is really, really interesting. If you do get a chance to read his biography, please read the book Becoming Steve Jobs. It's much better for entrepreneurs than the Walter Isaacson version. You'll get a much deeper perspective of what went on at Apple that created one of the biggest companies in history.